Hello students, Del Ballou here, and this is session 3 on how to paint a beach scene in oils. And since our last session, to begin with, I have used a soft bristle brush while my clouds were still wet. I used it to just lightly go over and smooth out some of the rougher places, blend in some of the um, shadows with the highlights without completely doing away with the highlights. Now, I still think this is a little bit too rugged for me, but that's purely personal opinion because, as I keep saying, all clouds are different. These clouds, if they were real, would change within 2 or 3 minutes anyway. But for now, it's sufficient. And what I've done before I took my tape off, I have done a background color with burnt sienna. And I've done this just because when I get ready to do my sand and my highlights in my sand, I want to have a nice rich background on which to do that. And this area right here is going to blend into the water. This is where the water has conceivably been and has left the ground, the sand, wet. And I'll be doing more work on that. But I have also put in the beginnings of my ocean. Now, if you've ever spent any time looking at the ocean, you know that unless it's a real stormy kind of ocean or a lot of wind, in our part of the country, we don't have extremely high waves. So there's not a lot of activity, and this is just the beginning. But what we'll be doing is give the illusion that there is some movement going on. And I'll be doing that with rather parallel lines. Some of these are kind of wavy right now, but they shouldn't be in the long run. And then we're going to give the illusion of breaking waves, but that'll come in a few minutes. But I'm using cobalt blue as my base, which is what I use for the clouds. And I'm also using a touch of red and a touch of orange. And what we want to do here is have several different shades of blue, if you will, to give that feeling of movement. And as the water moves, it picks up the light slightly different. So we want to give that impression. And then we'll put in some waves and then bring the waves on into the shore. And I've also, if you've noticed here, I've also drawn some lines to indicate where my sand dunes are going to be. Now these sand dunes are going to be in the distance, so they're going to be smaller. The sea oats that come out of them are going to be much smaller to indicate distance. This side will be much closer, and also the sea oats will be longer, and they'll be going up into this area. Now, my canvas is 24 or 12 by 24, which means it's shaped differently than what most of you are going to be using, which is 16 by 20, or whatever you choose. But this is the canvas that I had. So I have to give a little more attention to the spatial organization of my sand dunes because I do want to stretch them out. So I'm going to be working on the water first. I have, once I removed the tape, I have a good sense of where my horizon line is going to be. And I would suggest, if you want to save some time, because your canvas is probably dry by the time you start to work on your water, you can actually put another piece of masking tape at the top so that you don't have to deal with what I have, which is trying to maintain a straight line. But I'm not too worried about that at this point. So let's work on some water. Now, basically what I've already done is that I've used some of my medium. And so it's a fairly thin line, which for this water is fine because it actually is going to give me that sort of translucence that I'll be looking for as I'm blending my colors together. And in this case, I don't want to over blend. I want to make sure that I have some distinction between my colors. Now this is going to be a little too, and I'm going to cross in front of this camera so I can work from a comfortable distance and direction. Now you notice that's actually a little bit too dark, but what I'm doing is going back to pick some of that up. This is a little bit tedious, but not too much. And I don't mind that my liquid is creating some brush strokes. And you want to make sure that you bring this on out. And I'm picking and choosing as I go along which lines remain. But you don't want this scrolly effect. Because what's happening back here in this water in reality is that the sky is reflecting down on it. And the changes in color have to do with where the light is picking up on those rolling waves at this point, because they're not in the breaking stage as yet. Sorry to keep walking in front of the camera. Maybe I will just move everything to the other side. This is what happens when you're a one-woman film crew. I don't know if you can see that my brush is leaving some trails. As long as they don't curve too much, I'm not unhappy with that. I'm using a soft brush because I want soft blending. I'm really liking what's happening here. It's very subtle. And if you haven't spent much time at the beach staring at the waves, like some of you have begun to stare at trees, I would advise you to do that. It's very educational. I've taken hundreds of photographs of the ways in which waves break, and oddly enough, there are some patterns to breaking waves. I'm just going to continue to do the same thing. This takes a very steady hand, and sometimes my hand is steadier than others. And in a few days, if you don't like what you've done, the paint should be dry. If you've got some liquid in it, and you can come back and correct or change whatever you'd like. For years, all I ever used for beach scene painting was acrylics. But I really do like the options I have. Now here's a little thing I'm doing with just a bare touch of the tip of my brush. I don't quite have enough white on it, but I want to suggest some distant wave movement. This is so faint, I doubt you can see this in the video, but I'm barely touching. And the same holds true for these kinds of strokes as when doing your foliage in the trees, shapes of the shadows and the highlights, and in your clouds. You want to go with an irregular pattern. You don't want to do the same thing over and over, so that some of these can be a little whiter. You don't want to break down the illusion here by developing too many patterns. And I'm actually going to call this a session because I don't want to have too much information. But before I do, let me clean up these edges a little bit. Blend them in. Now you may realize, if you can tell the distinction in this color, that maybe this is going to be the color we're going to use for our wet sand. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching. Please put your questions and comments down below, and feel free to write me if you don't understand something I'm doing or saying. I know that seeing these finer details on video may not be easy, but I will be back. Thank you for watching.